Welcome to the first ever live webcast of Debt Free in 30, where today, Doug Hoyes and Ted Michaelis will discuss everything you ever wanted to know about debt and answer questions from our listeners. Let's get started. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
It's 7 p.m. on September the 14th, 2016, and we're broadcasting live from the Hoyes Michaelis offices here in Kitchener, Ontario. Today's topic is everything you were afraid to ask about debt. We know that debt is an uncomfortable topic. You probably don't like talking about debt with your friends and your family. If you have too much debt, you may not even know who to turn to for help. If you have friends or family who have too much debt, you may not know how to help them. It's embarrassing. You've got questions, we've got answers. That's why we're doing this first ever live broadcast of Debt Free in 30, where we're going to answer your questions about debt. You can watch this program in the privacy of your own home. No pressure, no embarrassment. For the last 2 weeks, we've had a link on our Hoyes.com website and on the Hoyes Michaelis Facebook page, and we've invited you to ask your questions about debt. The response has been huge. We won't be able to get to all of the questions today, but we've had a number of similar questions, so we're going to do our best to get through as many of the most asked questions we can on today's broadcast. This is a live broadcast, and you can get in on the conversation in 3 different ways. You can go to Twitter and use the hashtag DFI30. You can put your comments on YouTube. If you're watching this live on YouTube, you might be watching it at hoyes.com/live. If you click on the little YouTube button in the bottom right-hand corner of the video, that'll take you to YouTube itself, and you can enter some comments there. Or you can send us an email at dfi30@hoyes.com. So the hashtag on Twitter, and you can see the Twitter stream there on the right-hand side of our screen. The hashtag is DFI30 for DFI30. Comments on YouTube, or you can email us at dfi30@hoyes.com. So to help discuss it, I'm joined by my Hoyes Michaelis co-founder, Ted Michaelis. Ted, how are you doing today?
Not bad. Good evening, everybody.
So let's get started. We've got a whole lot of things we want to cover. Now, Ted, you and I make a lot of appearances on TV and on radio, and we're quoted in the paper. And for years and years and years, you and I have been warning people about debt. And Canadians today have more debt than ever before. So I'd like you to start, Ted, by telling me some numbers. What level of debt are we talking about?
Well, let's start with something that's easy for everybody to understand. Currently, Canadians have $1.65 in debt for every dollar of disposable income that they have. If that doesn't sound like a big number, well, think about it then. So your paycheck is $100, means you owe $165. For me, it sounds like a problem.
Well, and what's a big problem about that, and I've thrown a graphic up on the screen here, is that level is twice as high as it was in 1990. So clearly things are getting worse. I guess the real question, though, is that a problem, or is that something we need to worry about? Now, we're taking questions today. And as I said, we've had some listeners who've actually sent in some questions for us. So what I'd like to do is start by playing a question from one of our listeners and who kind of addresses this exact topic. So let's listen to the question, then Ted, you can give me your thoughts on it.
Okay.
Hi guys, Mike here. First off, love the podcast, but I disagree with some of the things I've heard you say about debt. I was listening to one of the podcasts that you had with the guest Hilliard McBath talking about the real estate bubble bursting. And quite frankly, it hasn't. I actually bought a condo in Toronto about 2 years ago now with a really low down payment. And it's actually way up in value. So I've made lots of money. And even if prices go down a bit, I'm still actually way ahead because I took out such a big mortgage. So I don't really see a problem with debt, if it's good debt used to buy something that goes up in value, say like your house. Anyway, again, love the show and looking forward to hear sort of your thoughts on this and an answer to this. Cheers.
I love that term, good debt.
Yeah. Well, he loves the podcast, but isn't totally in agreement with some of the things we say. But that's fine. Let's kind of break this down. And for people who are new to this, he's referring to a podcast I did with Hilliard Macbeth, who wrote the book When the Bubble Bursts: Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. And that was show number 89 of our Debt Free in 30 podcast, which was broadcast back in May of 2014. We actually put the audio of that show up on YouTube, which you can find at the Hoyes Michaelis YouTube channel. And it's been downloaded and listened to, 4,000 times, something like that. So anything to do with real estate obviously is a big issue. So let's talk about what this particular caller is telling us. So he's saying, okay, so I bought a house, and I'm just going to make up some numbers here. I own a house that's worth $500,000. I have a $300,000 mortgage on it. So the equity that I've got in the house is $200,000. I had a really big down payment. I get a 25-year amortization on my mortgage, 5-year fixed rate, so I can get a mortgage for 4%, something like that if you got good credit. So the payment that you're making is $1,600 a month. So if you make $5,000 a month, that's $60,000 a year. So your debt to income ratio would be $300,000 in mortgage debt, $60,000 in income. That's 5 to 1. Well, that's way higher than the 1.65 we just showed on the last screen. Is that a problem, or is the caller right that no, this is all great, everything's good? What say you, Ted?
So there are a number of different ways to look at the caller's situation. So the first thing is, he said he's made a lot of money, and that's only true if he actually sells today. So until you sell the house, you haven't made any money at all. What you've got is a house with a mortgage payment. There's nothing wrong with that. We all have houses with mortgage payments. That's just the way the world that we live in. But the risk here, well, there's a couple. So let's say that this housing market that's gone up really fabulously for him in the last couple of years, so he thinks he's made a lot of money, suddenly corrects and goes down the same way. I mean, if it went up that fast, it can go down that fast. I think that's reasonable. Well, so the mortgage doesn't go down proportionally. If there's a correction in the market, the correction's going to be in your equity. In addition, the thing that's got me most concerned these days is interest rates are at historic lows. I think you can get a mortgage now at 2.5% or 3%. 10 years ago, it was 5 or 6%. So if the mortgage rates go back to what they used to be, that $1,600 a month payment that Mike's got right now is going to suddenly become, well, let me do some math in my head, probably $2,300, $2,400. So instead of being a third of his pay, now it's half of his pay, and things are going to get interesting. Now, Mike will say to me, well, Ted, I'll sell the condo then and I'll get out of trouble. Well, if the market's depressed that much, it's because people aren't buying, and psychologically it's harder for people to make that decision to sell when they think they've lost money, even though there's been no money changing hands, because you're still going to get more than what you paid for it. So it's a lot more complicated than Mike alludes to. I'm glad that he's in a situation where things have gone up, but I don't think it's the rosy deal that he thinks it is.
Yeah, and we've got some numbers that we're throwing up on the screen here. So this is housing, what we've called unaffordability. So this is household real estate as a percentage of your disposable income. Well, obviously, the higher this number is, the more risky it is. You also talked about it's not a profit until you sold. Well, here's a chart showing price vulnerability. So this is owner's equity as a percentage of real estate. And again, you can see that owner's equity was a lot higher if you go back to 2000, 2002, something like that. Obviously at the bottom of the crash, it was a lot worse than that. And then you also raised the issue of interest rates, and I threw that slide up while you were talking about that. Right now, interest rates are very, very low. Interest rates go up, and we've got a serious problem. So are you saying that people should not buy houses now? Are you saying people should buy houses now? Or are you saying be aware of the risk?
Well, always be aware of the risk, but it depends on why you're buying the house. You have to live someplace. So if you budget the payment that you can afford for the house that you can afford, then I still don't see houses as a bad thing. I know there are people that disagree with me these days. But if you're buying it as a speculative investment, a way to make a lot of money fast, then you are automatically assuming more risk. The more risk you assume, the more risk that something can go wrong. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I'm, as people who listen to the podcast will know, I'm kind of more on the side that, oh boy, I'm really worried about.
Stay out of real estate.
Yeah, I'm just worried about it now. When you look at where certainly the prices are in the Toronto area, and that's bubbled out all over Southern Ontario.
Yep.
I mean, if you owned a house in Calgary, it's worth a lot less now than it used to be. And you look at things like the Vancouver market, and things have kind of faded there as well. So it's, I don't know, it's something that I think that we got to worry about. But okay, we want to get to as many listener questions as possible. So that was some thoughts on real estate. There are two big things people get loans for. Houses are one, cars are the other.
Yep.
So our next caller has a question about, well, it has to do with a car and a few other things. So let's listen to the question. Then again, you can give me your thoughts on it.
Hi, Doug and Ted. My name's Lynn. I was just wondering if you could tell me, I got soaked for a secondhand car after I finished my consumer proposal. And I was just wondering, are there government guidelines about what they have to tell you about the car and how much they can actually charge you? For a 2012 Chevy Cruze, I was charged $25,000. And unfortunately, I went by myself. And I'm just wondering, do you have anybody that actually goes with you when you are looking at cars or anything of that sort? Obviously, you would be paid by the hour, but I'm just wondering, is that a possibility? Okay, thank you very much.
So this is a very good question. She covers a lot of ground in that question. So let's kind of break it down. And first of all, Lynn, thanks for sending us in the question. I'm glad that your consumer proposal went well and that you've completed. Yeah, yep. That's fantastic. So for people who are tuning in and aren't quite sure what we're talking about, Ted, why don't you start us off with the basics? What is a consumer proposal? What's Lynn talking about here?
So a consumer proposal is a procedure whereby you offer to repay a portion of your debt, a portion of your unsecured debt. Now you're probably saying, well, why would anybody take part of what I owe them instead of all of what I owe them? Well, it's designed as an alternative to bankruptcy. The bankruptcy, you're saying, I can't afford to repay any of my debt. They're very specific rules. And if you look on our website, we detail what all those rules are. The proposal is designed to be a deal, an arrangement you make with people, a win-win for both sides. You afford to repay the portion that you can. Your creditors receive more money back than they would have received in a bankruptcy. I mean, it's a great solution. A lot of people still haven't heard about it, though.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why we like to do these things. So let's get back to Lynn's question then. She asked if she got, her word was soaked. Soaked for paying $25,000 for a 2012 Chevy Cruze. Now, I'm not a car guy, as you know. You happen to be a car guy. You have nice cars. Me, man, not so much. So a 2012 Chevy Cruze, is that worth $25,000?
Well, a brand new Chevy Cruze is probably worth about $35,000. And so, for a 4-year-old car, $25,000, it certainly seems high. I mean, I don't know if that's the price she paid or if that's the price of all the borrowing. I mean, those cars actually go for somewhere in the $13,000 to $15,000 range on Auto Trader. So it sounds like there's a problem.
And we don't know exactly when she did the deal, whether it was a 2-year-old car or 4-year-old car at the time she did it. So let's leave that aside. And I guess our advice would be, if you're buying a car and you're like me, you're not a car guy, then what's your advice?
Well, so cars are the second largest purchase most of us ever make. So houses being the first one. You might buy 2 or 3 houses over the course of your life if you're lucky. The power is all with the people selling them. The real estate agents, the people selling houses, they do this all the time. They do it day in, out. You do it almost never. Cars are almost as bad. You got no power. You got no experience. Maybe you go to a new car dealer 5 times in your life if you're really diligent about buying new cars. So, are there people that can help you? There aren't services out there that I'm aware of at reasonable fees that'll do this for you. You need to rely on family and friends, people that you trust that will help you. In fact, it's always good to take somebody with you just to make sure that there aren't any pressurized sales tactics that you fall for, because it's them against you.
And obviously doing your research in advance, looking at the black book, all that sort of thing. So I guess on the car side of it, that's probably what I'd be focusing on. Now, I think there's more to this question than that.
Right.
I think what Lynn is really saying is, okay, I mean, let's assume that the car really was worth $12,000 or $15,000,
right?
And her payments are now going to be $25,000. Well, there's a huge chunk of interest there.
Correct.
And the reason there's a huge chunk of interest is because her credit was not perfect at the start of this. She had filed a consumer proposal, completed it, and then went to finance the car.
Right.
So what happens to your credit when you file a consumer proposal? You already told us the good stuff. All your debts, your unsecured debts are wiped out, but how does that affect your credit and your credit score?
So while you're in a proposal, actually the debts are still going to show on your credit report. They're just in a holding pattern. There's no new interest on the debts. You're not making payments on the debts directly. You're dealing with them through the proposal. When the proposal ends, the fact that you filed one of these things and you offered a deal to your creditors to get out of debt will show up for up to another 3 years. So you've done your payments. The fact that you did the proposal is still going to hang around for 3 more years. That probably means for the first couple of years, you're looking at higher rates of interest when you borrow. So I could easily see in Lynn's case that maybe the car was $15,000, but her payments total 25. So she's paying 10 grand in interest. Well, that's probably 21 or 22%. That happens a lot with car loans after a proposal or a bankruptcy.
And so if you are going through a proposal and you know that you're going to be financing a car in the future, what are some steps you can take either during the proposal or before it's over to begin to rebuild your credit so that you
don't get hit with those kind of rates?
Yeah, you don't get hit with those kind of rates.
So one of the most important things is to start rebuilding your credit as soon as possible. Now you're probably thinking, well, I'm in a proposal. How can I rebuild my credit? Well, what you've got to do is access some new forms of credit. It might be a car payment. More likely it's going to be something like a secured credit card. What your creditors are looking for, people that are going to grant loans to you in the future, is how have you handled yourself since filing the proposal? So are you using credit as a tool or as a necessity? Probably before the proposal, when you accumulated all this debt, you didn't have a choice. It was a necessity. Now, as part of the education process of the proposal, we're going to try and teach you better ways to look at credit, better ways to handle it, so that you can use it as a tool instead of a necessity.
And one of the pieces of advice we would give people is, okay, if you know that in the future you're going to need to access credit, you want to make yourself look as credit-worthy as possible.
Right.
And there are strategies. The obvious ones are make sure you're paying all your bills on time. Things like cell phone and cable and things like that are starting to report to credit bureaus or at least have some minor impact. So you want to keep your bills up to date. But it is possible to do things like get a secured Visa card or a credit card, get an unsecured credit card. This is not something that we go out and tell people, make sure you do it.
Right.
But if you need to begin to reestablish credit and you're going to make sure you're not racking up huge fees on it, or racking up huge credit on it, then that would be one possible strategy.
Yeah, the analogy I use with people is when you're filing a proposal or a bankruptcy for that matter, when you're done, it's like being a teenager again, except you've got this added black mark of having had a credit problem in the past. If you wait till the procedure's over to start rebuilding your credit, then you're going to be behind the 8 ball. You need to start rebuilding it as soon as you are able, and that means, again, using credit because you want to as opposed to need to. So as crazy as this may sound, we'll encourage you to get a secured credit card and actually use it every month. Because what you're demonstrating is that you can handle the payment stream. You use the card, you pay it off. You use the card, you pay it off. If you never use it, you don't demonstrate that you're actually using credit properly. If you use it and don't pay the bill, you're not demonstrating that you use credit properly. So it's a balancing act that you want to do going forward just to show that you are handling credit responsibly.
Well, and that raises another interesting question that we had emailed in this week, and it was from one of our clients, and they said they were very happy with their consumer proposal. They planned to have it completed in about a year. They were very happy with their advisor here at Hoyes Michaelis, but they are not sure that Hoyes Michaelis should be in the business of making money on credit renewal because there are already enough credit card scams out there. So their advice for anyone is to focus on completing their consumer proposal. So, this is a happy enough client, but tell me, Ted, what's your response to that? Are we making money off credit renewal?
Yeah, that's the part of this that confused me a little bit because we don't get paid any fees for any of these types of credit instruments we're telling people to get. If you go out and get a secured credit card, I don't get some kind of kickback or anything like that, so I'm not sure how I'm making money. Having said that, I think I would be irresponsible for me not to tell you how to handle your credit properly in the future. So if I simply, dealt with your old debt problem and cut you loose, the odds of you repeating the problem are higher than if we take the time to educate you on how to handle credit properly in the future so you don't come back and see me again.
And that's really what we're trying to do. I mean, people come into me and they say, well, I've got all these debts, so I have to do something, but I don't want to go bankrupt or do a proposal because if I do, I'm going to end up not having a credit card and I have to book a hotel room because my kid plays hockey up north and I got to, rent a hotel room, or, I've cut my cable to save money. I've switched over to Netflix, which is only $10 a month, but I've got to have a credit card to make the payments on it. I need to, buy stuff for my business online or whatever. And so because people are asking us about how can I have access to credit at, during a proposal at the end of it or whatever, that's why we give them this kind of advice. It's not something we're pushing though. And a lot of our clients say, hey, you know what? I never want to have credit again. Well, that's fantastic. Then don't. So we're trying to
it's a balancing act like everything else.
Yeah, we're trying to bridge the two, and that's kind of what we do. So we've got another question here, and again, this relates to a consumer proposal. So let me bring this one up, and you can give me your answer on this one, Ted.
Hello. What happens if you were employed when you signed up for consumer proposal and now unemployed and have no money coming in?
So this is not a horribly uncommon scenario.
No, in fact, it's probably more common than anybody realizes.
So what say you, Ted? What's the answer?
Well, so the most important aspect of this for the fellow asking the question is reach out and tell somebody that your situation has changed. So the law requires when you file a proposal that you disclose your income and your situation at the date that it started, and you're not required to do it again. I mean, so we make a deal on day one, and that's the deal. You're going to pay $200 a month for the next 5 years. You pay $200 a month. You don't have to tell me if you get a better job. You don't have to tell me if you lose your job. But realistically, if you lose your job, how are you going to make the payments? So a couple of things we encourage. If your proposal is to pay $200 a month, then maybe you should try to find a means to pay $250 in the outset, so you build yourself a little buffer. That way, if something does go wrong, you've got a couple of months that you've built up as a buffer zone that nothing happens, that you can, I can't pay this month, but it's okay, I'm already ahead of things. Alternatively, and again, more importantly, if something goes wrong, something changes in your life, go in and see the person administering your proposal. You've got the right to go back to the creditors and say, look, my situation has changed, we need to change the deal. And in most cases, the creditors will accept a revised deal if your situation has changed. It just makes sense. In fact, there are cases where somebody's lost their job in possibly year 3 or 4 of a 5-year proposal, and we've just gone back to the creditors and said, look, he's paid you for 4 years, let's call it done because he's lost his job. And they agree to that too. The creditors aren't stupid. They're looking for you to get out of the proposal so you can be rehabilitated and get back in the credit using community again.
And so it's really a two-part answer then. It's get yourself set up for success to begin with.
Always plan for the worst to happen, so prepay those payments if you can.
And then if something happens, then try to deal with it again by talking to us. And sorry, go ahead.
Well, the biggest mistake is that people think that they're stuck with this payment and that there's nothing anybody can do, and so they don't talk to us. I mean, the way the law is written, you fall 3 payments behind and your proposal is automatically canceled. It's important that you see somebody before that happens. You want options, you want alternatives. Well, the sooner you talk to somebody, the more options and alternatives that you have.
Well, and like you said, this is a not uncommon scenario. For someone to lose their job for a month or two is not unusual at all.
Yep.
And so, I mean, one of our tricks, if I can give out all our secrets here, is that proposals are always worded as a monthly payment.
Right.
The maximum time period is 5 years, so it wouldn't be uncommon to have a proposal of $200, $300, $400 a month for 5 years, which takes care of perhaps $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 worth of debt. Well, if you get paid bi-weekly or weekly, then you can make your payments more frequently.
Sure.
So a $400 a month proposal, you could pay $100 a week if you get paid every week.
And you'd make the equivalent of 13 months payments every year.
And yet you wouldn't notice it because it'd be $100 coming off every paycheck.
In fact, it's safer to do that because it's $100 coming off every paycheck instead of trying to come up with $400 once a month.
Yeah, and that's how we like to do it to do it. So again, if we can get it set up correctly, and obviously we're going to look at your budget and make sure you can afford it. But then if things go wrong, then obviously get on the phone with us and we can help you through that. So. Correct. We've got another question from a listener that's along the same line. So the question was, after you file a bankruptcy or consumer proposal, how long does it take for the creditor calls to stop?
Well, that's a good question. We probably get that from everyone that we see. So I'm glad we decided to pick that as one of the ones we're going to deal with. A couple of answers. So when you file a proposal or a bankruptcy, we're required to send out notices to your creditors within 5 business days. So that doesn't means you don't count weekends or holidays. It's done electronically now, so usually it's done much quicker than that. So about 5 days is the maximum. So the creditor gets it. Probably it takes them 3 or 4 or 5 days to process it or get to the right person's desk. So we're talking about at least 2 weeks for the paperwork to get to the person where it's supposed to be to get the phone stopped. So one strategy is just ignore the phones for those 2 weeks and see what happens. Probably something more productive. Answer the phone and say, look, I filed a proposal with Hoyes Michaelis yesterday. If you contact them directly, they will send the paperwork to you. And that happens all the time. So a creditor will call us and say, did John file a proposal yesterday? Yes. And then we'll send the information directly to the person making the call instead of them having to wait for their processing department to get it to them 2 weeks later. So the answer is the phones, if you do nothing, will probably ring for a couple more weeks. If you're proactive and answer the phone, we can get them stopped very, very quickly.
Yeah, and we keep a list of the major creditors, the big banks, the collection agencies they use, and so on. And so if for some reason you're still getting calls, like you say, a few weeks after we've notified them, and so that everyone understands, when a bankruptcy or proposal happens, we are electronically sending the information out to the creditors. It's not like we're photocopying it, licking a stamp and sending it out, and then there's a postal strike.
I remember those days.
Yes, we are not young men, unfortunately. We do remember. It goes out electronically. It's usually in their system pretty quickly, but sometimes Bank ABC will turn the account over to a collection agency. We don't even know that a collection agency now has it. We send it to the bank. It's the collection agency that is phoning you. So if you tell us who it is that's calling, we can usually get through to an actual live person. So and that's how we would do it. Now, I said that this is a live broadcast, and in fact, that's exactly what it is. And we've had a question come in on YouTube. So, as I said, people can send us questions through our website or on Twitter at DFI30. So, the question that has come in is this, and it's from. I believe Right Q is what the person's
doesn't matter
what the person's YouTube handle is. So my bankruptcy was 21 months and will be discharged in November 2016. How many years until the bankruptcy will no longer show on credit checks?
So if this was your first bankruptcy, likely it will be displayed in the legal section for up to 7 years from your date of discharge. So if you're looking at discharge November of this year, you're looking at November of 2023 as the last likely date for it to show on your credit report. Now, that's important, but what's more important is how long is it likely to interfere with the way you handle your finances. And experience has shown us it's the first 2 years after your discharge that you have the most discomfort. That's the period of time where you've got to, and if you haven't done it already, do the most to rebuild your credit worthiness in the eyes of the lenders. Usually by the 3rd year, you qualify for things like mortgages and car loans and even regular credit cards if you put the right steps in place beforehand. And
it's key to remember here that just because something is showing up on your credit report, it does not mean life has stopped.
Oh, it doesn't. I mean, this is a fact that nobody ever talks about, but it's about 11% of all Canadians ends up filing bankruptcy or proposal at some point in their life. So it's 1 out of 9 people. Next time you're at a hockey game looking around, you look around the stadium and there's 5,000 people in there. Well, that means 450 of them have probably filed bankruptcy or a proposal at some point.
Or will at some point. So it is a big number. So a bankruptcy will appear on your credit report for 6 or 7 years after the date of your discharge, depending on which credit bureau you're talking about. If it's a second time bankruptcy, it will be longer. A consumer proposal, we already hit this one earlier, is 3 years in most cases from the date you finish paying your proposal.
Correct.
But that does not mean, as you said, that you can never borrow. Or you have to wait for the end of that 3 years or 6 years or 7 years. The key is start taking steps to rebuild your credit sooner if you're going to want credit in the future.
Right.
And if you can do that, then that sort of it sets you up.
Put a plan in place and start executing it early as opposed to letting things happen to you.
And if you file a consumer proposal or bankruptcy, there are 2 credit counseling sessions that are part of that. And these are the things that are discussed at those sessions. And obviously our professionals are happy to sit down with you and talk about these issues. We want you to leave the process saying, well, it wasn't the happiest day of my life when I went to meet with Doug and Ted and their people. But you know what? I'm glad I did it.
Yeah. You got a toothache, you go to the dentist. Well, at least we're not sticking our hands in your mouth.
Yeah.
I don't believe I said that.
That's okay. It's not live week. Oh, no, it is. Yes. It is live. We'll have to edit that out. So we've got another question, and this is kind of an interesting one because it's a question from Jonathan Chevreau. Earlier today, I recorded a podcast here in Kitchener with Jonathan Chevreau and Mike Drack, who've written a book called Victory Lap Retirement. The podcast that we recorded today will be released on September 24th, so you can go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and subscribe to Debt Free in 30 so you don't miss it. And we've had more downloads this last weekend than we've had in any other weekend, so there's more and more people who are listening to it. Now, after we recorded the show, Jonathan and Mike and I were talking, and Jonathan asked me a question. I said, hey, that's a great question. Would you mind recording it so I can answer it on tonight's show? And he said, well, can I plug my book? And I said, yeah, sure, Jonathan, you can, he didn't actually say that. I'm embellishing the story here. So by way of background, Jonathan wrote the book Findependence Day about how to become financially independent. And his new book with Mike is about a different view of retirement. And in both books, he makes the point that debt is something you have to get under control well before retirement. So let's listen to Jonathan's question, and then Ted, you can give us your thoughts on it.
Hi, Doug. This is John Chevreau, co-author of Victory Lap Retirement. I had a question about the senior debtors. I know that a lot of the people in your studies, the seniors, are really badly hurt by debt. In fact, some of them are so desperate they have to resort to payday loans. I wondered what kind of solutions you see there. I mean, personally, I think they need to work a little more, at least part-time, semi-retirement. But in particular, I'm worried about the combination of longevity, living to 90 or 100, plus the rising medical costs, whether it's long-term care, nursing homes, etc. How do you tell seniors to get out of debt and simultaneously build a nest egg that will take care not only just of their leisure time in retirement, but also their possible rising medical bills?
And this is a very good question, and so there you go. If you're interested in Jonathan's book, victorylapretirement.com. This is not a paid commercial. We don't do paid commercials here, but I did read the book, and it was quite interesting, so that's why I've put it up there. So Ted, let's talk about seniors, the problems they have, what you see. Give me your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, well, so let's start with some basics. The number of seniors filing an insolvency proceeding, a bankruptcy or proposal, the fastest growing segment of our client base. So we're seeing more and more seniors that have gotten themselves in more and more trouble. Interestingly, the average person that files with us owes about $56,000 worth of debt, unsecured debt, credit cards, loans, that sort of thing. The average senior that files with us owes about $69,000. That's 20% more. It's heavier credit card debt, and the scariest thing of all is they're the largest users of payday loans. The average person we see might have 1 or 2 payday loans totaling $800. The seniors, it's $3,700. And their average income every month from pensions and other sources is only like $2,400. So, I don't know how anybody can do that, and obviously they can't.
Yeah, it's obviously a serious problem, and I put the slide up there about the different. Seniors are the fastest growing risk group, and there's a whole bunch of others as well. 1 in 5 insolvent debtors that we see are lone parents.
Yep.
So if you're watching this today and you are a lone parent, a single parent, then you are at greater risk than someone who's got 2 incomes in the household. Student debt is a huge growing issue, and it's especially a problem for women, and we've talked about that in many cases. You hit on the idea of payday loans. 1 in 5 people who we deal with has had at least one payday loan, and in most cases more than one.
Right.
And fast cash loans, predatory installment loans are growing, and we talked about auto loans too. They are becoming more and more unaffordable, and a lot of that is because you can now get an 8-year car loan, which is
For a car that'll last 4 years if you're lucky, right?
yeah, it's just absolutely crazy. So back to the issue of seniors then. Why is it that we are seeing more and more seniors compared to the past? I mean, we don't have medical bankruptcies here like they do in the US. What's the real issue?
Well, I mean, one of the issues here is the seniors are becoming part of that sandwich generation. They're looking after kids that have returned home because something's gone wrong for them, and now they're looking after their parents who have survived longer than perhaps anybody thought. That's a good thing. We want grandpa and grandma to be around as long as possible, but somebody's got to foot the bills. And what we're finding is that those 55 through 70-year-olds are finding themselves squeezed from both sides. So that's a big source of why they're incurring so much debt. The other thing is, of course, that they may not be planning properly for the use of debt. So it's not uncommon now for someone to get downsized or to find new employment in their 50s. Well, 20 years ago, that just wouldn't have happened. And anytime you're downsized, you generally take a 25 or 30% pay cut. So you might have had a comfortable life where you could afford your debts, and suddenly you are earning significantly less. Well, your car payment hasn't gone down, your mortgage payment hasn't gone down. You've got to get that money from somewhere. And so they incur more unsecured debt, lines of credit, loans, after they've eaten up whatever savings they had. There are a number of factors that contribute to how much debt seniors are carrying these days. It's quite distressing.
Yeah, and like you say, there are a lot of different factors that factor into it. I mean, we don't have guaranteed pensions like we all used to.
Right.
Nobody works at the same job for 45 years and retires at age 65. You're much more likely to be working longer, to work at a series of jobs. So,
and then Jonathan said people are living longer.
Yep. Yep. I mean, if you live to be 65, you're probably going to live to be 90.
Right.
And when our pension concept was originally created, we were thinking, well, okay,
75.
Yeah, maybe 70. I mean, the CPP in the 60s, it was kind of projected out, well, the average person's going to die at 69, so it's not going to cost much. And obviously things have changed. So if you are either a senior right now, or if you have perhaps parents who are seniors, what are the types of advice you would be giving them to be prepared for their later years?
Well, so the critical element to this is all cash flow. You've got to learn to live within your means and then well within your means. So it's not just that the amount of money going out is less than the amount of money coming in. At some point, it needs to be significantly less. You want to make sure that, as Jonathan said, you retire your debt before you retire yourself. Anyone who's thinking that they can service significant credit card debts or payday loans on a pension is probably fooling themselves, and they're setting themselves up for some serious trouble.
Yeah, it's just not possible. You just can't do it. You have to be out of debt before retirement or your senior years gets there, or else it's just not possible to do it. So, well, that's good. And I see by the clock that we have, of course, as we always do, gone
on a little too long.
Much longer than 30 minutes. So I guess this show will have to be called Debt Free in 43 or whatever it is we end up finishing up on. But that's great. I think we covered a lot of ground, and there's two more questions that I want to ask you before we close. And like I say, it's been, I think, a great show. We've covered a lot of different items, and I'm watching the YouTube ticker here. We've got more people watching than I was expecting, so that's worked out. That's worked out great. Yeah, well, they're watching, so we're certainly happy about that. So for everyone who didn't get their question answered today, and obviously there were a bunch of them because we kind of ran out of time, you can always go to hoys.com, click on the Contact Us button, and send us a message or give us a call, and we'd be happy to help. So I want to close by asking you two questions. So the first question is, we've got a lot of people who are watching us today, or who will be, watching a recording of this, and they're sitting there going, okay, I hear what you guys are saying about debt, but it's not a problem for me. You're obviously talking about somebody else, right? So sure, I've got a credit card. Absolutely, but so does everybody.
Yep.
I've got a car loan, but of course, how can you buy a car without a car loan? Yep. And yeah, I've got a mortgage, but again, you can't buy a house without a mortgage. Yep. So sure, I've got debt, but it's not really an issue. How do you know if the debt that you've got really is an issue and is something that you should be worried about?
Yeah. I think the critical thing is, if you are at all concerned or worried about your debt, then you probably have more than you're comfortable with. I mean, that just goes without saying. So some danger signs to watch for. You run out of month, You run out of money before the end of the month. So you get paid bi-weekly and you always find yourself short at the end of the month when you're waiting for that final paycheck to come in. You're worried about who's on the phone when you see one of those 800 numbers. Is it a collection agency calling? Are you behind in your payments? Are you getting past due notices in the mail? Are you actually considering going to get a payday loan to make ends meet this week? I mean, all of those things are indications that there's probably something wrong with your cash flow. The money coming in is less than the money going out, and we've got to deal with it somehow. But fall back on the first one. If you're at all concerned about this, if you're losing sleep, you're getting stressed about it, probably you should be trying to find somebody to help you. And I don't know if that's your mother, your father, your uncle, your brother, your banker, somebody like Doug or myself. I mean, if you're having a problem with debt and it's something that you're not familiar with, getting somebody else's advice and help is a first great step.
And you're talking about it not in terms of numbers, but in terms of stress.
Yeah, the numbers are on black and white usually make this pretty obvious, but most of the people I talk to don't do the black and white until they sit down with me. So it's the stress of, I think I've got a problem, so I don't really want to look at it and be told how big a problem it is. Because once you actually list out who you owe and what your payments are, it becomes obvious that you got to do something.
Yeah, and if you're sitting there watching this this video or listening to this as a podcast at home, go take a look at your kitchen table. Do you have a pile of unopened bills sitting there? Yeah. And is the reason because I don't want to know what's happening? Is your phone light flashing because you've had 15 calls and you just don't want to pick up the message? That's what causes a lot of the stress. It's the unknown. So, okay, let's talk about then as the final question, what can actually be done about debt. So let's make up a scenario of a person, a male or a female, because our clients are pretty evenly split between both. And obviously we deal with a lot of seniors, but we also deal with lots of people who are 30, 40, 50 years old.
Right.
So let's say I've got $40,000 worth of unsecured debt. So unsecured debt being credit cards, bank loans,
lines of credit, whatever.
Even income taxes, which are able to be included as well. And I'm looking at my different options. So we know that the first option would be keep trying to pay it back yourself.
Right.
And we've kind of crunched some numbers here. So to pay it back on your own, I mean, obviously it depends on what the interest rates are and how long it's going to take, but we could be talking $1,000 a month.
Sure, at least. I think that's a pretty conservative number, actually.
And is that realistic if I bring in $2,500 a month?
That's 40% of your pay. That's probably equal to what you're paying for rent, at least. So.
Yeah, so if you're bringing in 10 grand a month, fine, no problem. Yeah. Pay it off on your own. And we are certainly advocates. If you can pay it off on your own, fantastic.
Pay it off on your own.
That's exactly what you should do. Yeah. But if you've got that much debt and you can't pay it off, and so I think there's probably the biggest warning sign of all. How long is it going to take you to pay off your debt on your own?
Sure, and that's why the credit card bills, the government introduced that, right? You've got on the bottom of your bill, it shows you how many years it'll take you to pay off if you make the minimum payments.
And if it's going to be many, many, many years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, then obviously that's not an option. So paying it off on your own, if you can do it, fantastic. If you can't, well, the next option would be a debt consolidation loan. So explain what that is and why there could be an advantage to that.
So a consolidation loan is where you go to a lender and you ask them to give you enough money, either through a loan or a line of credit, to pay off all of your other debts. The primary reason for doing this is to simplify things and to get a lower rate of interest. So let's say you've got 4 or 5 credit cards and they're somewhere between 12 and 28% interest. You get a consolidation loan or a consolidation line of credit, it's probably going to be at 7 or 8, maybe 9% interest. So that in and of itself is going to save you a significant amount of money every month, and it'll make your life easier. You only have to worry about the one payment. Now, there's a bit of a fallacy to consolidation loans in that most banks won't give them anymore. If you've got a bunch of debt with Bank A, so you got a loan, a line of credit, and a credit card, probably they will consolidate their own debts. But what we find is that people are dealing with Bank A, Bank B, credit card company C, finance company D, and maybe a payday loan company. And you won't find a bank anymore that'll actually loan you enough to pay off other people's loans. They're concerned that it's putting all the eggs in one basket and it's too risky. So consolidation loans are a great solution. They're just not available to many people anymore, which is too bad.
Yeah, so I guess that's a pretty good summary. Fantastic idea.
Right.
And if you can get it. Yeah, and if you got $100,000 of equity in your house and you need 10 grand, fine, no problem. But if you don't, then it's just not going to work. So The next solution that people would think about is a debt management plan. So in the example that we've kind of crunched the numbers on, so okay, if I'm going to pay it back myself with all the interest, maybe it's going to cost me $1,000 a month. If I could get the interest rate lowered a bit and do a debt consolidation loan, then maybe I'm talking, $800-900 a month. What is a debt management plan, and why is it cheaper than a debt consolidation loan and paying it off on your own?
So in a debt management plan, your debts aren't actually paid off, they're pooled together. And in most cases, the interest is reduced or completely eliminated. So what you're doing is you're making payments directly against the principal. Now, the example that we've used on this $40,000, we're looking at you paying it back over 5 years, 60 months. That's possible. It's a little misleading in that most credit counseling agencies that do debt management plans want you to repay them over 48 months. So the payment's likely going to be higher than this. But still, if you can afford to repay your debt in full, it's the interest that's killing you. Debt management plan is a good solution. It's not very well known because these not-for-profits don't have the money to advertise their services.
And as a result, they're not an option for everyone. And I guess if you've got $40,000 worth of debt, and in our example here, we're saying, well, maybe, $667 to do it over a 5-year period, to do it over a 4-year period, obviously you're looking at more than that. You're up into the debt consolidation loan range.
Correct.
And again, if I can't afford $1,000 or $900 or $600 or $700, then I've obviously got a problem, which is why people come to us and we talk about on this slide, the final option, which is a consumer proposal. So you explained briefly what that was before, but give us the 30,000 view again of that. Of what is a consumer proposal?
So again, the idea behind a proposal is you're offering to repay a portion of your debt. In this particular example, so we're saying somebody owes $40,000. Typical repayment would be $12,000, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% of what you owe. There are no hard and fast rules. You're making an offer that the creditors get to agree to. Now, remember what I said earlier. There has to be a reason for them to agree. Well, a proposal is an alternative to bankruptcy where they generally get significantly less. So even though it sounds crazy that somebody might take 30 cents on the dollar, 30 cents on the dollar is better than nothing, which is the real premise behind a consumer proposal.
Yeah, and so in this particular example, we're saying that consumer proposal may end up costing $200-300 a month.
Yep.
Well, okay, if I'm bringing in $2,300, $2,400, $2,500 a month, rather than paying $1,000 on a debt consolidation loan, to pay $200 or $300 a month on a consumer proposal, that sounds like it makes sense.
Yeah, again, we have to look at your situation to make sure it's manageable, but just on the face of things, $200 or $230 a month versus $1,000 a month. I mean, it's not complicated. Again, one of the problems we have is that a lot of people never heard of this as a solution, and it just sounds too good to be true. Well, remember, it's a legal procedure, and you're doing it as an alternative to bankruptcy. So there are downsides to it, but for most people, it's an excellent way to get out of debt.
Yeah, and that's why it's obviously something that we suggest. And bankruptcy is an option as well, but we do fewer bankruptcies now than we do consumer proposals.
Yeah, that's true.
By a significant margin, actually. So it's not something that's a number one option for a lot of people. So well, that's great, Ted. And we've covered, as I said, a lot of ground today, and so really appreciate you being here for this. And as I say, all the people who've been watching us live on YouTube and all the other different vehicles that were out there. This
Debt 3 and 48.
That's right. Yeah. Well, so
whatever.
Whatever. So and frankly, you and I, always sort of become a little bit verbose, and that's one of the reasons why we changed the format of the podcast.
Right.
For the first 2 seasons, it was 30 minutes because that's what the radio stations required. We decided this year to take it off the radio so that if we wanted to talk for 48 minutes, we could.
Sure.
Obviously, our listeners can fast forward and stop unless they're watching something live. So
there were no commercials, so don't try to skip commercials.
That's absolutely right. But we've also are going to be doing a lot of episodes that are a lot shorter than that, where we key in on one specific issue. So I think we're giving people the both sides of it. Right? Yeah, giving them what they need. So again, we encourage everyone to go to our website at hoys.com. You can look up everything we've talked about. We've got the full show notes and everything. If you didn't get your question answered today, then we're happy to answer questions going forward. We've got lots of staff, many different offices. So if you send us an email at, go to hoys.com. That's the easiest thing to do because we've got a contact link there. You can find all our different offices, all our different phone numbers, and we'd be happy to talk to you there. So in closing, Ted, are there any final thoughts that you would like to leave people with?
Well, I mean, debt's not something that most people are familiar. Well, I'm sorry, that's wrong. They are familiar with it. They don't know how to deal with it when it becomes overwhelming. The trick with all of these things are, if you need help, reach out and get it from somebody. I mean, we're obviously trained professionals and we're happy to do this for you. But even if you just talk to a close friend, a family member, your banker, your accountant, somebody, the trick to dealing with a debt problem is to try and identify it early and make plans while you still have options. Don't let people force you into a corner because you're ignoring the problem.
And what's the cost when you come in to see us?
Well, there isn't any cost to come and see us the first time. Obviously, we're trying to figure out whether or not we can help you. In fact, half the people we talk to, generally we can just point them in the right direction.
They're going to refinance their house. They're going to talk to a credit counselor or whatever. So it doesn't cost anything to talk to us. Doesn't cost anything to send us an email. So that's obviously
it's starting to sound like a commercial.
Yeah, it is. So we better close it off there then, because we wanted to make this informational. I think that's what we've done.
Right.
So Ted, thanks very much for being here today. Certainly appreciate it, and I think hopefully we've answered a lot of questions for people as well. That was what we were trying to do. As I said, we're going to put up full show notes on our website at hoys.com. So please go to hoys.com. That's HOYES.com for more information on everything we discussed today. Until next time, thanks for watching and listening. I'm Doug Hoys. That was Debt Free in 30.